Value Coffee Talk podcast.
I'm April Morley.
Thank you for joining, April, my co-host for this event. This podcast is a service of the Enterprise Value Collective. And April, tell us what the Enterprise Value Collective is all about.
Absolutely. It's a community for business value leaders and practitioners. It's sponsored by our value consultancy, Genius Drive.
Awesome. And our mission through those two entities, the Enterprise Value Collective and our sponsorship by Genius Drive, and what we're here today on the podcast, it's a mission to help accelerate and optimize the value articulation in each of your customer engagements and throughout your customer lifecycle. So we're here to talk about everything value and to help you to optimize your program. And we have our coffees ready today. It wouldn't be a value coffee talk without our coffees. And I've got my dirty chai, so since I don't drink coffee. Our guest today is Scott Jeffries. Welcome, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited.
Scott is currently the head of global value advisory out of Miro, and he is a value leader veteran for companies like Slack, NetSuite, SAP, Business Objects, and several more. Scott, anything you'd like to add about your career or background?
Yeah, I started out actually in finance and accounting, so did the old CPA, MBA thing. So a lot of my perspective also comes from kind of thinking in the terms of financial statements. I had a chance to work for technology companies for 30 plus years here in Silicon Valley, and kind of fell into this line of work. And it's been a great career over the past 13, 14 years.
Yeah, many of us are pioneers in kind of helping to create and establish what this space is all about. No one started out as a value engineer or consultant, right? That didn't exist when we were coming out of school. So I started out on the product side. In April, I think you started on the sales side, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, awesome. Well, today we're here to talk about an important topic. One, Scott, that I know you're living right now. You were part of some of the biggest and best value consultancy out there. SAP, one of the pioneers. You were with NetSuite. Slack had a fairly large program. Many of us now are finding that, okay, as we transition, as we grow our careers, we're moving from some of these bigger programs where we maybe cut our teeth and learned to now joining smaller companies. And wanted to find out from you, as you join a smaller organization, what was the first thing that you experienced? What's the biggest difference that you see between big and small?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is lack of infrastructure, really. I remember when moved from Business Objects, where there were two of us and building business cases for visualization of data, dashboards and reports and things like that. And then went into the SAP machine, which I think was about 250 people worldwide. Shakib had already built out a pretty substantial program across the world. There was a lot of infrastructure. And we were used to kind of bootstrapping it and making it up as we went, and went in and sat down, and they showed me their first business case, which was about 50 pages long, about 30 pages of calculations. And we did business cases that were about 10 slides long. So I think the first thing is just lack of infrastructure, and you have to build the infrastructure. And I think the other thing is you have to execute as a value professional while at the same time evangelizing for the program, which is a little bit different. When you're in a well-established program, most of that evangelizing has been done for you. There's a track record and a history of success, and then you can just go execute. When you start something new or come in when there's a few people, you've got to balance those two things. You got to promote the program and at the same time execute and support revenue generation.
Yeah, I can attest to that as well, Scott. So where have you seen folks struggle the most in the transition?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest struggles is if people have been at more well-established programs, that's how they've been trained, and that's what they've done. And so I think the first reaction is you bring in what you know, and you bring in what's comfortable to you, and you want to implement that. And the reality is every technology company is different. Their solutions are different. The markets that they serve are different. The go-to-market teams are different. And so I think where some people struggle is they get a little frustrated because they want to do it like they did it before, but they're in a different environment. Even whereas SAP sold ERP systems and NetSuite sold ERP systems, you'd think, oh, it's got to be the same. But they serve very different markets, and the go-to-market teams were different. And so the ability to kind of come in, and I tell people, I say the first thing to do for the first 3 months is do nothing. It's not really true. You want to be doing some stuff, but the reality is you've got to do a lot of listening, a lot of asking of questions. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge. People get frustrated. They come in, they want to go, and sometimes you got to slow down to speed up. And I think that's when you start a program, that's a pretty big thing to remember.
Yeah. I think, Scott, too, a lot of the smaller organizations tend to be still very product driven when you
Oh
think
yeah,
about it. And
yeah.
a lot of the larger companies are more marketing, sales
Mm,
driven
yeah.
organizations. Talk about how that impacts what you do, maybe first, second, or third as
Yeah.
a value leader within some of the smaller companies.
Yeah, that's a great call out. In fact, it's interesting. I've talked about this frequently at Miro because we are in that going through that inflection point where exactly as you described, early on the product team leads everything, and then as you get a little bit later in your development and think of SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, whatever, it's more of a go-to-market driven organization, which is why those companies tend to buy companies because it's harder for them to innovate. And I've gone through that a few times. And so, when you're starting and you come in with an organization that's very product focused, the product team's like, what do you mean? It sells itself. It's awesome. Our technology is great. And we've gone through a little bit of that because it's really product led growth and a lot of great success. But you do get to the point in time where you need to start then actually building out more of the value messaging. And I think so when you go in to an organization that's really sales and marketing focused, there's probably a quicker adaptation of a program like this. But the reality is those ones, there probably already is a program. I mean, NetSuite was a little bit late. They were about 750 million in revenue when I joined. They were by their own admission a little late in building a program. Most are kind of like Miro, Slack, 500-ish million or less in revenue. And so then you get a lot of that product piece. And so what I spent a lot of time trying to do, and kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, is with my background, I try to just be able to communicate with those folks that ultimately somebody's writing a check for whatever it is they're purchasing. And at some point in time, people are going to want to understand what they're writing their check for. And so that's where the justification comes into place. And our CFO has been really great about also communicating how he views investments in technology. He said, I need to understand what that value that we're getting out of our investments. And so having a strong CFO and folks like that definitely help. But I think that is, you just got to do, again, more of that evangelizing and really painting the picture, not only with customers, but internally so that they understand. And I do think once they get it, it's really cool. I've seen it here, which is once they get it, they're like, oh, now I understand. Now I understand how this capability or this group of capabilities impacts somebody's financial statements. And if you're part of a product development team, people probably haven't done that with you before. And so they can see that tie. And that's when I think it actually gets kind of fun. And our engagement with the product team has picked up here quite a bit in the last 3 or 4 months because now they're starting to appreciate the ultimate impact on their customers' organizations.
That's great. And it sounds like you've made this transition several times across different companies and different stages. What do you think you would have done differently?
Well, the first one I kind of mentioned, I think, when I first went into NetSuite, I was like, let's go. I got all these plans. And then, you kind of stop and go, oh, maybe I should actually ask a few more questions and maybe listen a little bit more. So I think that was probably the first mistake I made. I think also the most times when you go into a company that wants to do one of these programs, they have people that are used to having those programs support them, and they've come from a bigger company, and it's just been a natural thing for them to do, so they've pushed it. And so I think the other thing is to assume that everybody in the company is on board, like everybody's like, this is a great program, and the reality is there's still a lot of people who've not been exposed to these programs. A lot of people who are in kind of startup-y land, they go from another startup to another startup to another startup, and most of those
Mhm.
don't have programs. And so you get to that point like we are, and it was the same thing at Slack and NetSuite, where you had a mixture of people that have been there from the beginning, and then people that have been at bigger companies who are used to these programs. And I probably didn't spend enough time with the people early on that didn't know about the programs, just assuming that they would get it. And so I did not assume at Slack and Miro. I came in pretty early on and kind of almost assumed that I had to evangelize to everybody, because the other piece of that is I've had to here and at Slack talk to people that were used to programs and explain to them why it wasn't exactly like they were used to.
Right.
And so it's just a different conversation, but you're still evangelizing what the program needs to look like or probably look like in that environment. So I think that was another thing that I had to learn pretty quickly.
We've seen too some leaders where it's like, oh, let's implement value. Okay, let's set up a business case factory, or
Yeah.
let's put in some automation in place and let's roll out a tool and check value is done in the box. How do you kind of overcome that concept of, we like to think of value as everything, but sometimes that leader might say, well, value is one thing and this is it.
Yeah.
And if we just do that one thing, it'll have us check the box and then we're speaking value.
Yeah, I think one of the things that helped me the most and has over the last three is building out a multi-year plan and having pillars to that plan. The pillars that I tend to follow are influence revenue, develop content and tools, and then enablement, kind of roughly. And then within those, make modifications to it. And the reason why I do that and use that as a tool, and I still do. So I've been here about 15 months, and I still pull that thing out all the time and walk through it. And we've added more specificity to it. But what it does is it starts to communicate the breadth of what a program can look like, and then allow you to fine tune it. So the first one that I did a yearish ago here, it looks different. The pillars are still the same. Some of the components are still the same, but then we made modifications and added to it. And I think what that's allowed is it's allowed us to not be pigeonholed, and it's allowed people to think broadly about what a program can look like as you get multiple years in, because there's certain things that you also have to plan for. You talked about automation. You can go do automation quickly, but at least in my experience, I think you need to learn more about the environment and kind of
Mhm.
what we talked about before you really do automation. Because once you make some decisions about automation, as soon as you automate, you lose flexibility. And,
Mhm.
regardless, and that's just kind of the way software works, right? You're taking away some level of flexibility. So I think having that multi-year plan, being flexible within that, and then again communicating that to get feedback, I think opens some people's eyes. I know here there's some things that I brought up and showed, and senior leaders are like, wow, I didn't really realize a value program did that. Like that's, because not everybody has that experience. So I think that's really key to helping just move things forward and not getting too pigeonholed. I think the other piece of it that's important is that plan needs to tie to your overall company strategic initiatives, OKRs, V2 moms, whatever they happen to be. And so then when you're talking to a leader, you show them exactly how the things that you have on your strategic plan or your roadmap meet or match to those OKRs. I very specifically visually, because our tool's visual, literally just put the OKRs there and just mark them and put it. And so as I'm showing it to them, they know exactly how our plan maps to the overall corporate plan. It also identifies areas where we potentially, again, could support where they hadn't naturally thought of a value program supporting. So it's been a really good tool for us to be successful in our communication.
Yes, Scott, I really think having that charter is important. The other thing I've also recognized and seen in some programs is if you don't take charge of the charter, it's not like it's going to be handed to you, too,
Correct.
right? Talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, and it gets back to a little, yeah, so 100%. I think that if anybody's starting a program and thinks that people are going to lead them to where they need to get to, then that's probably not the best spot for you, because you to do something like this, it's hard and it's fun, but it's different. And it's very different leading a program of that's, by the time I left NetSuite, it was 6 years in. We had 25 people globally. We were doing, hundreds of millions of, support and dollars in support and business cases. It was running. Um, that's a different skill set than coming in, rolling up your sleeves and going. And I think that, the you've got to be able to just kind of work through those things. You've got to do that balance of making sure that you're leading the charter within the context of what the company is trying to accomplish and keep tying back to that. But you absolutely have to lead it. Like, you have to evangelize. You have to, I was on a call this morning and we had this old joke. I coach kids teams a lot. And the joke is you got to say something 7 to 10 times. And that applies to adults as well. Right. So you've just got to be okay with knowing that you're constantly evangelizing until you get to that steady state, which, can take a couple of years, 2, 3 years.
Absolutely. It's all about evangelizing.
Yeah.
So, Scott, what is the one piece of advice going from big to small that you'd like to leave our Enterprise Value Collective with today?
Yeah, I think circle back on the just, first thing to do is just kind of come in, and we talked about some things to do structure wise, but I think the first thing to do is come in and just understand the company. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of step one. Don't be too anxious to kind of show why they hired you, right? That will come out as you lead the program. I think it also leaning on other people who have done it before. Obviously, April, you've done it before. Tom, you've done it before, and others who have expertise in this world. People are very open to having conversations. It is a pretty tight knit community, and I think people are very willing to help each other kind of get through these things. So lean on experts like April and Tom, and just be willing to kind of you go into that with that learning mindset. You are the leader of the program, but the most important thing I think is to be learn the entire time and be able to adapt to the situation.
And there you have it. I appreciate you coming on the podcast, Scott, and sharing your experience with us. So thanks for participating in the Value Talk podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much
Absolutely.
for having me. Appreciate it.
Please sign up for the Enterprise Value Collective on LinkedIn or on our geniusdrive.com website. You'll be able to stay in touch with us, be able to pose questions to us and to the community to learn more, keep up on the latest events. We've got tools that we'll be publishing out there, and also insights and advice articles. And until next time, our Enterprise Value Collective, keep sharing and growing